he who has controlled his seminal energy has also controlled his prana and mind. In experiments conducted in the 1960s, nuclear physicists in China came to recognize the notion that qi is actually a low frequency of highly concentrated form of infrared radiation. So we have, in the 1960s, palatable empirical evidence that denotes this life force, this qi, this prana, this ki, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to share with you by the end of the video the mechanism, the instrument by which we can start to intentionally move this prana, this ki, this qi through the body, and what it might mean when we can. So this radiation is the euphoric energy that is present when experiencing frisson, chills, and goosebumps. There is an interesting subreddit, which is referenced here in Pure Attention, on spiritual chills, basically denoting these particular synonyms of the goosebumps that you get whenever you listen to an excellent piece of music, or perhaps you have a spiritual moment in meditation, is actually the flow of qi, of prana through the body, or in a more scientific and Western vernacular, this low frequency concentration of infrared radiation. Researchers have witnessed certain test subjects who were able to consciously emit this form of energy from their bodies. For those who doubt that qi, ki, prana, or aura are demonstrable and quantifiable, associated with infrared radiation in the human body, there is a Harvard study on the Tibetan people who use the same energy under a different name called Tummo. Well, it's not, the energy isn't called Tummo, the mechanism by which they're, what would you say, moving and experiencing the energy is through Tummo, which is a form of breathwork. I actually just got done doing a little bit of Tummo before today's video. So perhaps I'll segue over to this particular study here. Harvard study confirms Tibetan monks can raise their body temperature purely with their minds. So a 1982 study of the Tibetan practitioners of Tummo yoga did indeed demonstrate their ability to raise the temperature of different parts of their bodies. And here you have one of these Tibetan monks in his traditional wear, hooked up to all these scientific instruments and testing whether or not he can change not just the temperature in his body, but also different parts of the body, which is very, very advanced and has been recorded before, especially in these sadhus, these yogi practitioners. And here you have it, studies showing that these monks can significantly raise temperature in fingers, toes, other extremities, purely through meditation and intention. And this was ratified by Dr. Benson, which was the director of Emetrius of the Benson Henry Institute and mind-body medicine professor of medicine, Harvard Medical School. And he continued to lead the research in this field into the efficacy of mind-body medicines to counteract the harmful effects of stress. And Wim Hof did something very, very similar, and he's changing, I suppose, our perspective on stress and how to mitigate it through purely breath work. So more specifically into Tummo, meditative practice targeting controlling the inner energy or inner fire, they call it sometimes. Tummo actually means fierce feminine, which is the feminine kind of chaos energy that is inherent in the solar plexus area. I believe the yogis always call this or refer to this as apana, which is a downward force of this kind of energy, a creative energy. So yes, Tummo, this inner fire, described as the sacred spiritual practices in the Indo-Tibetan traditions of Vajrayana Buddhism and Bon. It is also called psychic heat practice, since it is associated with descriptions of intense sensations of bodily heat in the spine. Little is known about the specifics of Tummo technique. Monasteries maintaining an intensive practice of Tummo are quite rare and located mostly in the remote Chinese provinces of Qinghai and Sichuan, probably butchering those, but also known as East Tibet. Since meditative practices are often associated with changes that are consistent with decreased activity of the parasympathetic nervous system, so this fight, this flight, this more stress-induced cortisol and certainly more anabolic side of our experience, comparatively to the parasympathetic rest and digest, this more nurturing, this essentially more feminine state of mind, which has less inflammation influences on the body, states of healing, states of recovery. All these things are very, very important to balance. And typically we are the former in our Western society. We're too much yang, we're too much anabolic, we're too much sympathetic. And they denote with collaborations with Dalai Lama, reporting that a study performed there in February 1981, we found that these subjects exhibited the capacity to increase the temperature of their fingers and toes as much as 8.3 degrees Celsius. Now, while there's a lot of references in this particular website, this particular blog post or research article, you call it, it's coming back to the initial post here around this idea of this infrared radiation, this prana, this chi, this ki, which is a palatable force in the universe. And these individuals are showing here on the right-hand side, they're influencing this purely through the instrument of the breath. So this paper from the CIA website on the accuracy of these spiritual chills or ki and its usage through the Eastern practices of Qigong. And it quotes, Chinese scientists using an array of modern detectors tried to monitor emissions originating from Qigong masters. So Qigong is another meditative, very similar to Tai Chi in the way that it more specifically works with this ki, given the name Qigong, energy work. They met with partial success by detecting increased levels of infrared radiation. Interestingly, the emissions oscillated with a low frequency. As the Taoist concept of qi crosses over into the West in recent years, the Western word bioelectricity was coined to describe it, since qi has a number of properties that seem similar to those electrical energies. Now, I really like this because I think it grounds us in something that is more factual and more empirical, and that a lot of you who are perhaps more cynical than others can accept this more readily. A simple definition of spiritual energy, or this ki, or this bioelectrical energy, is that blissful wave that can most easily be felt and recognized as present while you get goosebumps from a positive situation or stimuli. Eventually, you can learn how to bring up this wave of euphoric energy without the physical reaction of goosebumps. You can even feel it all over your body, flooding your being with its natural ecstasy, and master it to a point of controlling its duration. Now, I would never say that I was a master in this, but since I started practicing breathwork regularly, and I know this is a new theme coming up on this channel, I have noticed a greater influence in my ability to be able to do things like this. If I'm doing memory recall to a particular vivid memory that has positive emotions, I find through breath, through intention, I'm able to move that sensation all over different parts of the body. I can move it from my solar plexus into my heart, into my throat, into my head, all the way down to my toes. And this has been significant to the introduction of breath work. And the reason I believe it is because of its relationship with the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve is the king nerve. It runs central down the body, and you influence it by breathing, right? So this bioelectrical energy, your nervous system's energy, you can have more control over it by having more control of your breathing, by exercising your breathing through working with the instrument that is the breath. This energy has been documented under many different names: euphoria, tension, ecstasy, prana, chi, ki, various, aura, tummo, orgone, kriyas, manas, ode, bioelectrical energy, life force, pitta, frisian. There's a lot. So look, we're talking about nothing new here, certainly nothing new. This is something perhaps that's what I know is ancient. It's ancient. And here's that particular subreddit, in case you want to have a little look in there. Do take everything with a pinch of salt, of course, but I'm sure everybody has a familiarity with the kind of experience that I'm sharing here that is synonymous with the spiritual chills, or the scientific word is frisian. Now, to tie this back to creative energy, I wanted to share this particular excerpt that I've gone through before in a book called Science of the Breath, I believe, or Science of Pranayama. There is an intimate connection between the mind, prana, and your sexual energy. If one controls the seminal energy, the mind and prana are also controlled. He who has controlled his seminal energy has also controlled his prana and mind. Now, I believe this is in the greater context with breath work is why this works. So prana, another word for breath, And you can see here the influence prana has on vidya, on Shakti energy, sexual energy, once you know how to control it. And in a more Western way, you can control the buildup of bioelectrical energy in the pelvic floor and the sexual organs by having greater control over the vagus nerve. How do you better control the vagus nerve? You control the vagus nerve through breath work, through breath control, through practices like Tummo, like pranayama, like, there's various different kinds. And the first one is actually up on my Patreon. People are absolutely loving it. I'm getting a lot of love and messages from it. It's changing the daily experience of practices like SR, like sexual alchemy, because urges are now something that's a choice. Can you imagine that? It's now a choice to get urges. All urges are, is a build-up of this kind of energy around the root, around the pelvic floor. And if you tone the vagus nerve, the nervous system with the breath, you can consciously move the energy elsewhere. And it is that simple. I don't need to add anything more to that. And another little reference to Steiner, who's talking about occult powers, which all have a ground basis in Kundalini energy, sexual energy, whatever you want to call it. I am not going to lie to you and tell you that I'm there yet. But with the introduction of breathwork, which again, I'm a little bit annoyed that I never realized it sooner, things are changing very, very quickly for me. Very, very quickly indeed. And I hope I can give you the reasoning why you should be practicing this every day too. Often or not, when you think about the mechanisms that are going to take you to the next level, they're the simple ones. And it couldn't be more simple than breathing. So these aren't theories, they're facts. Speak soon.